Welcome to week 3 of Music Appreciation. In today's Composer Composite, we will discuss a pillar of music composition and a pioneer in moving things from a modal system into a tonal one, Georg Friedrich Händel. Or is it Georg Friedrich Händel? It's both? Let's discover more about the man with two nearly identical names and the period known as the Baroque. The term Baroque was originally given to the period from critics of its opulent ornamental style. The word itself comes from a French word meaning misshapen pearl. A common description of the Baroque style is filling space with action and movement, but truly Baroque artists sought to create a fuller world within their art, and the musicians were no different. The two compositional giants of the Baroque era were Georg Friedrich Händel and Johann Sebastian Bach. In fact, J.S. Bach's death in 1750 marks the end of the Baroque era. The Baroque period lasted from 1600 to 1750 and is divided into three phases. Early, which is considered 1600 to 1640, middle, 1640 to 90, and late 1690 to 1750. It should be said that most of the music that is studied today comes from the late Baroque, but it was the early period that was one of the most revolutionary periods in music history as we moved from a modal system to a tonal one. The Baroque period is considered to be the birth of functional harmony. During the Baroque period, Italy was the center for compositional innovation as the wealthy Medici and Gonzaga families supported music more so than any other private patrons. In Italy especially, a growing connection between text and music became the norm, with composers striving to heighten the music innately within the poetry itself. As a stress on text and drama reached a fever pitch, the form of expression known as opera was created. With opera, there are two main forms of text delivery: recitative secco, or dry recitative, and accompanied recitative. In recitative secco, the voices are accompanied only by the harpsichord and move freely, meant to mimic how the words would be spoken. In accompanied recitative, the voices are accompanied by the orchestra, so a more consistent tempo is maintained, so the text is overall slower to line up with the orchestra well. In the Baroque era, the doctrine of affections ruled the ability for emotional expression in music and art. The doctrine of affections created a sense of unity of mood, ensuring an instrumental work expressed only one basic mood throughout a movement. You would not see juxtapositions like Bernstein used in Chichester Psalms during the Baroque period, as it would be too avant-garde for the audience. The doctrine of affections went further to assign specific moods to each key, rhythms, or even melodic ideas. Vocal music, however, veered away from this principle in the name of expressing the extreme contrasts of emotion conveyed in the texts. It would not be a serious swing of emotion, however, and one emotion would be maintained for a little while before giving way to the next. In addition to a unity of mood, there was a continuity of rhythm with driving energy in the Baroque era. There was now a concept of strong beats known as noble beats, and weak beats known as ignoble beats in a measure. For instance, in common time, beats 1 and 3 were the strong beats, and 2 and 4 were the weaker beats. In 3/4 time, only beat 1 was considered a strong beat. As we've said, Baroque music is heavily ornamented and intricate. This method of writing creates what is known as an instrumental model melody, in which the melodies are long, elaborate, and difficult to sing or remember. There was a sense of direction to Baroque melodies, driven by sequences or repeated musical ideas at higher or lower pitches. Dynamics are also now present in music, though rarely written down. The method of changing texture and volume was through a practice known as terrace dynamics, in which the number of voices or instruments that were sounding were added or removed. Crescendos and diminuendos were not really used in this period. The main keyboard instruments also used terrace dynamics, as the organ and harpsichord did not have the capacity to gradually change dynamics. To circumvent the doctrine of affections, Baroque composers utilized separate movements within one piece that contrasted in expression. A movement is a piece that sounds fairly complete and independent, but is part of a larger composition. Usually each movement contains its own musical themes, comes to a conclusive end, and is separated from the following movement by a brief pause. This is usually done without applause between, and is used primarily because the players have to reset their scores for the next movement. Now to the man with two names, Georg Friedrich Händel. Born in Halle, Germany, young Händel studied music theory, organ, harpsichord, and violin with teacher Friedrich Wilhelm Zachow. Händel was a very talented keyboardist, and at 17 he was appointed organist to a local Calvinist cathedral. A year later he moved to Hamburg, where he served as a violinist and harpsichordist in the opera company's orchestra. It was here that he fell in love with sacred dramatic music, such as oratorios. At 21, Händel moved once more to Italy, where he began composing operas, oratorios, cantatas, and motets for the social elite. In 1710, at age 25, Händel was appointed the Kapellmeister, or choirmaster, for the Elector of Hanover. In this position, he was sent to London for 8 months. In London, Händel saw an untapped potential for Italian opera and negotiated another visit to London after working for the Elector for 15 months. This second trip would last the rest of his life, straining his relationship with the Elector. However, following the death of Queen Anne of England in 1714, the Elector of Hanover was named King of England, being crowned King George I. This allowed Händel to remain in London and eventually become a British subject in 1727 and anglicize his name. This is why he has 2 accepted spellings of his name. For your purposes, I do not care which you want to use, so long as it is consistent throughout. Händel is best known for writing oratorios, though he wrote in every major popular style in the Baroque period. He was also extremely popular as an opera composer and is regarded as the reason Italian opera was brought to England. Händel was beloved in his time, particularly for his Messiah, which was written in 1741, and his piece Zadok the Priest, which was written for the coronation of King George I, and has been performed at every coronation since. He is one of the most well-known composers from the late Baroque era and helped develop compositional practices used from the classical era onward to this day. For our listening considerations, we will examine the aria V'adoro Pupille from Handel's opera Giulio Cesare and the Hallelujah Chorus from Messiah, possibly the most famous choral work of all time. The opera Giulio Cesare was composed in 1724 for the Royal Academy of Music in London. It premiered in the Haymarket Theatre and was an immediate success. You'll never guess the subject of the opera. Go ahead, guess. I'll wait. The story of the opera follows Julius Caesar as he traveled to Egypt to find his enemy Pompeo. The aria V'adoro Pupille takes place at the opening of Act 2 when Cleopatra, disguised as Lydia, attempts to seduce Cesare. The full video can be found in the playlist posted under the content section of this course. The Messiah was born somewhat out of necessity. Beginning in the 1730s, public perception was growing tired of opera, and so Händel turned to oratorios, a non-staged, dramatic religious work. It is in 3 parts, with a total of around 2 hours of music. Interestingly, the Hallelujah Chorus, easily the most famous movement from Messiah, closes out Part 2 and symbolizes the joy following the resurrection of Jesus. Messiah premiered in Ireland in 1742 and grew in popularity following the London premiere a year later. This song and work is one of the most frequently performed works of all time, being performed several times each year, and is particularly popular around the Christmas holiday. And that brings us to the end of today's Composer Composite video. As a reminder, this assignment will be due Tuesday by midnight. And don't forget, tomorrow is the due date for our next current topics and music literacy assignment. Our documentary this week can be found on YouTube and is titled The Birth of British Music, Händel the Conquering Hero. That's it for now. See you next time.